Hi, everyone. This is Automation Hour, and thank you for joining us. If this is your first time joining, all lines are muted. If you have questions, please post them in the chat or use our Trailblazer Community Salesforce Automation Hour. We'll be checking that as well. And it could be a question related to this awesome presentation today by Shannon Hale and Jason Teller, or a general process automation question that you have. And after the session, we will be posting the recording to our YouTube channel, as well as our website, automationhour.com. We'll also post to Salesforce Automation Hour, so you know the recording is there as well. And we have some great sessions left for the rest of the year. So register for those if you haven't done so already. And even if you can't attend live, I highly recommend registering for them anyway, so that you could get a link to the recording after the fact. And we will start scheduling for next year's round of sessions shortly. So if you have a business use case with a cool process automation solution that you would like to share with others in the Salesforce ecosystem, direct message us and we will get you on for next year. And we cannot bring this free online webinar series to you without our sponsor, Concrete.io. So we want to definitely give them a shout out and thank you again for sponsoring us. And here are your co-hosts, David Lin, myself, Jennifer Lee, and Rakesh Gupta. This was from Midwest Dreamin'. And we look forward to seeing you at Dreamforce in November. And with that, I am going to hand it over to Shannon Hale and Jason Teller. They are senior directors of product management of the process automation team. So we're really excited to have them here demoing the really great Winter 20 items. So with that, I am going to hand it off to them to do their presentation.
Thanks, Jen. So I am Shannon Hale. I am Senior Director of Product for Process Automation at Salesforce. I focus mainly on Flow Builder, and you can find me on Twitter as Shannon Sands.
And I am Jason Teller, Senior Director of Product Management here at Salesforce as well. And I focus mainly on not Flow Builder when it comes to Flow. So yeah, I think that about covers it.
Yeah. Hey, Jason.
Yes, Shannon.
When are you going to get yourself a Twitter account?
What's Twitter? Oh, wait, what?
So when you all ask me a question on Twitter, usually what happens is I look over my shoulder and I say, hey, Jason, what's the answer to this? And then he tells me, and then I tweet it. But in fact, half the time it's him answering the question. So feel free to, just mention him in the tweet and say, hey, ask Jason to do foo.
The thing is Shannon is like so awesome on the Twitters that I think I'm sort of like riding her coattails in a way, and that's hard to let go of because I might fall.
All right. We always, of course, like to show our forward-looking statement. There's a good chance we'll talk about future functionality today, so we want to make sure that you make any purchasing decisions based on current product and not anything that we might say about the future. So if you've caught any of the release readiness webinars so far, and I think we had pretty much representation on every single one of them. We had Tim Peng on developer one, I was on the admin one, Jason was on the platform one, and we also have a recorded one that's going to come out sometime in the next few days whenever the sound crew finishes editing the live videos, that will just be all Flow. We'll post on Twitter when that comes out. But you've probably seen this slide before, and we got a lot of stuff done in Winter 20 between Jason's teams and my teams and the Next Best Action team. There's like a crazy amount of stuff to learn about this release. So why don't we go look at a demo?
Okay, that sounds great, Shannon. Thank you. So for this particular release, we thought the best way to kind of bring together a lot of the features that we created would be a demo around an employee app for employee new hire onboarding. So you may have seen this one in the platform release one, Readiness Live. I did this demo. We are going to also go through the demo in the Slow special that we did, that we recorded, should be out in a couple of days. But it's a great way of just sort of anchoring the discussion. And so I'm just going to go run through it really quickly this way so you can help understand like the different features we're going to delve into. And our goal here really is, we've been getting a number of questions around the different features that are in the demo. And so we're going to try to answer some of those questions here. Just to clarify a few things, but it'd be good to just sort of have context on the demo, especially if you haven't seen it before.
And of course, if you have any additional questions, the chat is open, and you can always ask them.
Yep, exactly. If you have questions on the demo, for example, we can certainly answer them. So in this particular scenario, Eric is a new hire at Brightbank, hasn't started yet, and Kat is his hiring manager, has to fill out new hire onboarding flows. And these flows actually include things like equipment provisioning, which is something done inside of Salesforce, and access sharing, which are things that are actually outside of Salesforce. And so the whole idea is to create a really simple and easy to use, declaratively built user experience, so that way we can make this process very seamless, but do a lot of automation and heavy lifting in the background to really help out these users so they don't have to keep clicking around and doing all sorts of complicated stuff. So the demo basically starts here with an email. And why an email? Well, basically, Eric, being a new hire, is going to be starting in the next 2 weeks. And this actually features one of our new features in Winter 20, which is our scheduled flows. So basically, there's a scheduled flow. It's set to kick off every day around noon, and it's going to check the applicant information to see who's starting in the next 2 weeks, and then fire off an email to that person to go ahead and start their onboarding process. So that's where we are here. Eric has received the email. It's not noon today. Actually, it probably just showed up. Let's go ahead and see if our flow's working. Our flow's actually working. This is the latest one that just ran literally a couple minutes ago. And it'll take you to this flow that's embedded inside of a community page. So basically, this is the concept of an employee portal. It's got a nice sort of engaging visual here, makes him feel welcome, and then it gives him the opportunity to update his contact information. And the reason, of course, that this is important is that Eric, in this case, his full name is Erickson Ware, but he goes by Eric. So this gives him the opportunity to update this information nice and early before everything like his ID and his email and everything is generated with that other name that he then may need to correct or then just deal with, while he's at the company. So I'm sure you've heard of this situation, and this is how do we mitigate that with automation. So when I click next here, even more automation in the background, we are actually notifying we've updated that record, and we're notifying Eric's hiring manager to go ahead and continue the new hire onboarding process. So let's hop over to Kat. Kat's the new hire Eric's manager. And so Kat is going to receive a post here basically saying, Eric's completed the info. Kat, go ahead and go here to the applicant record and run the new hire onboarding process. Now, what's really cool about this is that this whole thing happened without anybody actually having to think, oh, Eric's starting in the next 2 weeks. He went ahead and got the email. He responded to that. The email then went ahead and contacted Kat. So we kicked off this whole process in an automated fashion. So no need to stress about the fact that in 2 weeks this is going to happen. It's all just sort of happening naturally as part of their course of work. And that's a huge gain for a lot of folks. Just quickly over here, we have our next best action component. It's basically saying, based on the intelligence provided, bring ID documents for day one orientation, because it knows that that's often something that's needed. So Kat should remind Eric of that. Notice that the contact information here has been updated in the applicant record from Erickson to Eric. And then we have the actions and recommendations component here. This component's been here a couple of releases. We've been making consistent updates to it every release. I highly recommend you take a look at this. Basically, think of it as like a flow launcher. And you can essentially now with deployments actually configure which flows can actually be seen here in association with this particular record. And in point of fact, you can use the record action functionality that's backing this component to tee up flows to go ahead and say, well, you should run these flows in association with that record, kind of like a task list of processes or flows that you want to run. In this case, we're going to go ahead and do the new employee onboarding flow. When I click there, it kicks off this new flow. A couple things to point out here. It's got the stages in here. This is basically a path component that's been wrapped, and you can go ahead and put it in the flow. The code for that's actually in our documentation. A lot of variations you can actually put on this path component. It leverages stages in flow, which we've had for a little while, just to remind everybody, when you branch in a flow with stage assignments, you can basically change this user experience. It's really great because it guides the user through what's happening. In this case, we're taking a look at a screen to just basically update the information for Eric, including a dependent pick list here. That's a component that comes out of the box with Flow. So he's in the customer success department. We'll give him a role there. All of these fields are basically drag and drop inside of Flow Builder. And Shannon's going to be talking more about that in a minute. When I go to the next screen here, this is yet another cool feature we have for Winter 20 that Shannon will be talking about, and that is conditional visibility. I won't dwell on it, but it is really cool. And we really should eventually offer Eric an iPhone 11, but we're a little behind the times.
We have a backlog.
We do have that in the backlog. iPhone 11 in the backlog, duly noted. Location, remote, I did that just to show that you can actually not only show things, but also hide things with the conditional visibility feature. So super cool. This half of the demo is basically the Salesforce part. So by doing this, when I click next, we'll be creating an employee record along with associated equipment records for Eric as part of his new hire onboarding process. So it's chugging it along, it's creating those records. Now we move to the third-party integration piece. Now remember, this is all just one single simple experience. They don't really have, the users don't have any idea what's actually happening in the background. All they're doing is picking what people need. And in this case, Eric needs to get assigned to 2 of these Slack channels, maybe 3 because he likes free food, we think. And there's a welcome message we can go ahead and present to Eric. One of the cool things about this integration is that it is real time. So as soon as I click next here, and you look up here on the right, that's Eric's Slack, you can see that the 3 channels were added. Pretty nifty.
Spiffy.
Yeah, very spiffy. And then similarly, we want to share Quip folders with the employee. There's a whole bunch of Quip actions that are actually located in our core actions. You can go ahead and find those and do this work here. So in one case, this is like a straight custom built integration that can be leveraged inside of Flow with points and clicks. In the other case with Quip, this is the folder sharing. The Quip actions exist, and you can basically leverage them to make these changes. So in this case, we're going to give Eric some shared folders: escalation process, CAS directs, L1 service agent onboarding. When I click here, look down right on the right, you can see 3 new shared folders added to Eric's Quip. So really cool. We did Salesforce, we did third party, but it's all part of a couple of these screens. And then finally, let's wrap it all up and get back to Eric, because after all, Eric is the user in this scenario. So as soon as I click next here, we're going to go ahead and send an employee to Eric with all that information that he just went through. So let's hop back to Eric's email. And sure enough, we have a welcome to BrightBank Eric email from Kat. It provides his new hire information, his onboarding buddy, as well as the Slack channels and the Quip folders that he got attached to. And gives him some really nice information by joining BrightBank. All of this before his day 1 orientation, all of it already taken care of, all done through Salesforce automation.
I really like what Kat's done with her hair there.
Oh yeah, I think she's trying to go Doug Ayers on it. Yeah, that's a good idea. So okay, basically we have all those different pieces together. I also want to show you really quick the employee record. So when I go to Eric Ware, this employee record was created for him, as well as the 2 equipment records there as well. So all the Salesforce stuff, all the third-party stuff done via automation with Flow. Finally, we're going to go to the setup just to give you a quick overview of the actual onboarding flow that we've been talking about. So that way you get a sense of what we're going to be delving into with the next couple points. Here we go. So if I zoom out a little bit and I pan, you can see here 5 simple screens. This section here basically has the record manipulation to create new records for the employee as well as their equipment. And then here we have Apex actions for both Slack and Quip to retrieve the information, as well as add the channels and add the Quip folders as you saw. And then finally, get all that together, send out the email with all the information that they have. So with that, I'm going to hop on back to the presentation itself, and we can go through some of the questions we've been having around these.
Yeah. So you didn't actually show the scheduled flow.
It didn't show the scheduled flow, that's right.
And I think our first slide is actually about scheduled flows and how they work.
Well, there you go. Maybe we should take a look at the scheduled flow.
You think?
Okay.
No, let's take a look at the scheduled flow.
Let's take a look at the scheduled flow. All right. So, scheduled flow. If you look here, there's a triggered column that we added to our, oh, by the way, very cool Lightning flow list. So now we have both custom as well as standard, i.e. Salesforce Cloud package flows in the same flow list.
Huh?
Was that a question? Nope, okay.
No.
One click goes straight to the flow in the builder. Over here, you can access details and versions. There's also access, user profile access to run flows as well as the details. We've had a lot of people who were confused by the UX in the classic version where you click on something and you didn't expect to go where you ended up going. I think particularly with details as opposed to details and versions. If you guys want to go back to the classic flow list, actually, if you go to process automation settings, there's a setting to revert back. So that's something to consider, you know, if there's certain behavior that you want to have there. Let's go to the new here email send. So scheduled flows. For non-screen flows, because you can't schedule a screen flow, that would be pretty cool. But where did you see it? I don't know. You can actually double click on the now movable start node. Forgot to mention that part. Start node moves, it's crazy stuff. So basically, you have this flow trigger concept that we've introduced in Winter 20. Most of your flows will default to none because that's kind of how flow works today. But we've added what we call a schedule trigger. If you select schedule, you will actually have the ability to set a schedule with a start date and start time, and then frequency of once daily and weekly. And then you also optionally have the ability to run the flow for a set of records. So in this case, we are actually looking at applicant records, and there's a number of conditions that we want to meet for those applicant records to run the flow against. Now, this is probably one of the launch points for some of the questions that have come up, which is does this behave? There's a couple things I want to point out. The first thing is that things that happen in the start node happen before the flow actually gets run. So in like previous world, basically everything you talk about happens after the flow runs because you're going to run the flow. And then so sometimes you use a get records to get a list of records, and then you manipulate them through a loop or something like that. In this case, what we're doing is before the flow runs, we're actually doing a query into the database and pulling back all the records that meet this criteria. And then we are running the flow against each one of these records. So imagine for a second you did the loop with the get records, and then for each one of those records in the list, do an action. In a way, this is saying skip the loop, just do a query. Now I've got like 50 records, and then for each record, run the flow. So that's kind of the way to think about this in terms of what happens. And what this basically does is it puts you on par with a batch job, right? So if you look at something like scheduled Apex or batch Apex, which scheduled batch jobs are basically a combination of scheduled Apex and batch Apex, we're essentially doing the same thing. Get a bunch of records, then do something, where that something is run this flow against each one of those records. So if you want to do a collection or something like that, you can go ahead and do that inside of the subsequent flow, but you're not going to get a collection into the flow because it's literally one record per flow execution based on the criteria that you see here. So a couple points on this. So basically, this is sort of responding to some of the questions we've had. Start time is in the org's time zone. So that's how you know like what time it's actually going to start. As I pointed out, when you specify a context record, the interview is run for each record. That record is defined as $record global variable inside of the flow. So what is that record ID is going to be referenced as $record. Should you choose to use it, again, it's optional, right? You can just say run this flow and then do all your work inside the flow like you did before with a lookup and a loop and things like that. But this sort of gives you a huge gain in terms of potential performance because you're just doing a query and running individual flows. You'll find your scheduled flows under scheduled jobs and setup. Let me show you what that looks like. So if I head over here to setup and I go to scheduled. So the reason that this is like this is because, as I mentioned, the timer, the scheduler, right? It's the scheduler just by itself. Then it goes and queries, and then it runs a flow against each one of those records. So as you can see here, this is the new hire email send flow. It just ran today at 12:05 Pacific. It's going to run tomorrow at 12:05 scheduled flow. So that's why it shows up in scheduled jobs, because it uses the same scheduler as Apex does to go ahead and schedule these jobs.
So you're essentially just creating a declarative scheduled batch job.
We are essentially creating a declarative scheduled batch job. I think for the first time ever, an admin create a batch job, which is pretty cool. Then we get the question of, well, so what about pause interviews and scheduled actions? And they're basically the same thing. They're called a little bit differently and they're handled slightly differently. But those are flows that are basically running and then paused until a certain period to continue running, right? And that's why they show up in paused interviews. And so in those cases, you have a number of flows that are basically in a holding state. They're paused and they're waiting to run. And of course, there are certain limits to how many of those you can have. Whereas with this thing, it's literally just one scheduled flow, and then it's not going to get the records until it decides to run. Then it pulls the records and it runs them. So there's no sort of like penalty for accumulating, so to speak.
Speaking of paused interviews, we moved that to its own tab.
We did actually move that to its own tab. Good thing to point out. When we created the Lightning flow list, you're not allowed to have more than one list on the same page. It's a thing. And so basically we had to move this, and we gave it a Lightning flow list as well. There's no pause interviews, but this is basically what it is, and this is what it looks like. It's also under process automation. It says paused flow interviews. So yeah, thanks for pointing that out, Shannon. So limits are the same as Apex scheduler, also active flow limits. What does this mean? So basically, when you do scheduled batch Apex, you have limits of 250,000 records, or I keep getting this number wrong. I think it's 200 times the number of user licenses. Is that actually correct?
That is correct.
Wow. For
Ding,
once.
ding, ding, ding.
Yeah, geez. So that's basically how the limit on how many of these you can do is for a given job. So it's essentially number of records, 250,000 records or 200 times the number of user licenses, whichever is greater. That's the limit, and we created our own specific to scheduled flows, but it functions the same way as the Apex one does. We didn't want to conjoin the two because then you don't know which one's actually eating into the limit, and that gets a little confusing. Now, the scheduled flows as a feature technically don't really have a limit. However, we do have an overarching active flow limit. So you can only have so many active schedule flows as the active flow limit, which I believe is 2,000 right now. And so that's just something to keep in mind when you're actually out creating these, that is subject to the same sort of active flow limit when you're using scheduled flows. And one point on that is that when you activate a scheduled flow, it is scheduled and active, as you saw in scheduled jobs. When you deactivate a scheduled flow, it is no longer active, so it is removed from those scheduled jobs. So that's how you get them in, that's how you get them out. Scheduled flows run as the automated process user. That's because it's automation that happens on schedules, so like we don't know who kicked it off, so we use automated process user. Scheduled flows can't be run through the debugger, and that is the flow debugger, because as I mentioned, stuff is happening before the flow even starts, and then the flow starts, and there's no screens, and so it's hard to sort of do the end-to-end in the flow debugger, because the flow debugger assumes that the flow is running to show you what's running. So it's something we're looking at, like hopefully we'll be able to say plug a record in or something like that eventually, but it is a bit tricky for that reason. And so right now you can see the scheduled flow information in the debug logs though. You'll see the scheduled flow, and you'll also see the records that it pulled back and decided to run the individual flows against. So that is in the debug log information. And again, that's the best we can do right now.
So Jason, if I just wanted to schedule the flow part and not necessarily the schedule part, could I create my flow as a subflow and it passing in a record and test it all that way and then hook it up to the schedule?
Yes, you definitely can, because basically a scheduled flow is an auto-launched flow that you've attached a schedule to run it. Yeah, so you can definitely test it individually and then just set the schedule, basically. And if you want, you could even copy it, remove the schedule, test it that way. So there's a couple of variations of the theme that you can leverage, yes. Okay. The condition criteria can't use formulas. So this goes back to the whole point that I made about how that you're looking on the left here, the filter records, the condition criteria on scheduled flows happens before the flow is actually running. So in order for a formula to evaluate, we need a running state to actually do that. So in a flow, when it's running, we can evaluate a formula, right? When we do this sort of criteria up front, there's not really anything to be run. It's essentially just constructing a query to the database to pull back a bunch of records. And so in lieu of being able to evaluate a formula, or like a date field kind of formula, something like that, in this particular demo, for example, what I did was on the record itself, I had the information I needed to have evaluated on that record. So the whole thing about they're starting in 2 weeks, right? So basically on the applicant record, I had a custom field, says check the start date, is in the next 2 weeks. If it is, then return true. And then so when I go to retrieve that record, I can go look at that field, and if it's true, then it fulfills the criteria. So if you actually look back at my scheduled flow here, you can see it's starting in 2 weeks, custom field equals true. So that's literally how I did that. So if you need to have a formula evaluation, then you can actually have it done that way, because the record itself will do the evaluation for you. And then when you go to retrieve the record, you can see the state of it and meet the criteria condition that way.
Sweet. Everyone got all that?
Crazy stuff. Fast job for admins.
That's pretty cool.
It's very exciting.
Pretty cool. All right, my turn. I'm gonna push Jason over a little bit. We're sharing a table here. We're rolling around on our chairs. You can't see us, but it's fun. All right. I'm gonna jump back into Flow Builder for a second here and go take a look at our actual onboarding flow. So there are a whole bunch of things that we added to Flow Builder in Winter 20 that we like to call quality of life fixes, or small but mighty. It's my favorite. And some of them are simply things like we got rid of that need to hold down the space bar or press the button to pan. You can just actually click anywhere on the canvas. If you click on a node and move it, it's going to move the node, not the canvas. We added 2 lines so things don't get cut off as you create employee anymore. And we added a new button for drag to select, which I know everyone was really excited about and was missing from Cloud Flow Designer. So you just drag it and select it. Note that it automatically selects the connectors as long as I select the 2 things that they were connected to. And then I can basically select that, and I can move them around or duplicate them or delete them or whatever we wish. So that was one that we rather enjoyed getting in. It was fun to test. Inside the screen, and then the other big thing that, whoops, wrong screen. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was some of the new components that we have. Well, one. We added the ability to add LWC components to Lightning Flow screens. And out of the box, we now provide a lookup component. You can see in this particular org, we had a couple of community lookup components, but we now have a regular one. And if I scroll down and add the lookup component, oops. Jason's got his Jason's
This is nothing to do with scrolling. Come on.
Jason's scroll is different. All right, there we go. Add the lookup. All right, it's true. I just don't know how to use a trackpad. It's just sad but true. Every single demo, I've messed up the scrolling. So for lookup components, this is another one that we've been getting a lot of questions on because it works very differently than the community lookup component. Normally, when you want to create a lookup-like pick list, you would basically specify a query, and you would say, get me all accounts, and show their name. Now, what you do for our new lookup component is you're going to actually tie it to a specific lookup field. So in this case, I want to look up other employees, and so I am going to plug it into the onboarding buddy field. Oops. And yeah, this is the other thing. You will note that the field names don't actually show up in the picker here, so you have to know what they are. Onboarding buddy _ C, and we're going to call it onboarding buddy, and it is on the employee object. I have the option of specifying the current value and whether or not it's required. And I'm going to go ahead and click done here and save it as a new version so we can take a quick look at what this looks like. And we will just throw it in debug mode. And I need to go back and get Eric's applicant ID, or the flow will blow up, which is not what we want. Debug.
Okay, that was a scroll thing. That's my fault.
And now we can see that I completely mistyped the API name, which is why you don't want to mistype things, and it would be much better if we had a way to select that. You're just going to have to assume it's going to work for the moment, and I'm going to move on. Sorry, I'll come back and fix it if we have time, but I don't want to cut into the questions. It should have worked. It really should have worked.
So the cool thing about this is that you'd actually see a lookup.
Yes.
And then when you type, it'll actually pull up the records associated and you can click on.
Yes.
Which is super cool.
So when you're configuring the lookup component, things to remember. Oh, there's no underscore. Lookup expects the API names of an existing S-object and field. Jen, you might recall bringing this one to my attention. Person account considerations. When you're specifying that existing lookup and field, if you wanted to look up the account ID on a contact to get a list of accounts, it's not going to find person accounts because contacts can't actually have a relationship with person accounts. And so what you can do is it doesn't have to be the field that you're planning on filling in later. It can be any lookup field that happens to look up accounts. So you can use case.accountID or some other lookup instead. Similarly, owner ID can't be used as a lookup, and the reason for that is if you've ever created a formula, you might recall that owner is often what we call a polymorphic field. It can be either a user or a queue, and the lookup component doesn't really know how to deal with that. So if you really want to get a list of users, then you can just use the created by field on pretty much any object that you have. And the last thing that's kind of a gotcha is that lookup filters on the field are ignored. We thought we would be able to get that, and we were really excited. And then it turns out that because, long story short, in the Flow runtime, we're actually using a different technology than the rest of the page. We can't get the object that we need to pass into it. We're going to look at that, and hopefully we'll fix it. And since I now know what my field API name is, I'm going to go back and just quickly fix this and run it one more time so I can show you what it is. Name your fields consistently, folks. Really? Okay. Moving right along. I'm not sure what's going on with that one. Works on my machine.
Maybe you took away my access.
That's a possibility. All right. The other one, the other feature that we did that everyone's really excited about is conditional visibility. And you saw that in the outfitting demo where we had a toggle, and based on whether the toggle is selected or not, we hide or show the radio buttons related to the laptop choices. So if we scroll down here and we take a look at component visibility, we will see that what this is checking is if needs laptop.value, which is what the toggle is true, then we're going to show this thing. So as we toggle the toggle button on and off, it's going to hide and show the fields below. Now, the interesting thing about this needs laptop.value is that we have a new feature called automatic variable assignment. Now, if you recall, normally when you have a Lightning component, it has one list of input values and one list of output values. And we are now able to just basically not bother going and assigning those variables any longer. And what that means is that for something like dependent pick lists in particular, where you usually needed multiple variables in order to set the values of each pick list, you no longer have to do that. When you go into the laptop type and you're looking at component visibility, you'll be able to see that if we delete this, we have the screen component, and it looks much like an S object does. And I can just go in there and choose the input, the output variables right there and save it. So a couple of gotchas here. The big one, and I run into it every time. If you're working on a screen and you've just added the component that you want to use in your condition criteria, and you go looking for it and it doesn't show up, it's not you, it's us. We realized that you basically have to click done and reopen the screen properties. We're going to fix it in spring. We just really thought this feature was worth that minor inconvenience for now. So just keep that in mind. The second thing is this works on basically any component. It can be like our standard out-of-box components. It can be standard and custom Lightning components, and it can also be the new Lightning web components. But for regular components and Lightning components, you don't have to do anything special to get the changes to register in the runtime. If you have a custom LWC components, you have to fire the flow attribute change event to notify that the runtime that change has been made and they need to check visibility. So just keep that in mind if you're writing custom components. And then the last thing is, if you have a validation and you have a component that's not visible that's going to be used in the validation, your validation is basically not going to behave the way that you expect it to. So make sure that if you have any custom validation, that it's checking those values. Now, for the last one, how are we doing for time? I got lots of time. For the last one, we've had a lot of questions about configuring Notification Builder, and so I'm just going to actually jump back to our demo. I'm going to talk about two things for Notification Builder. The first thing is, one of the new fancy things that you can do in Process Builder is you can actually use merge fields from your notification to populate the message to populate the message that you're using when you send the notification. So for example,
and that's for any platform event.
And that's for any platform event, not just flows. So what we've got here is we've got a quick account. This expects an account name. If I click next, it's going to say wah, wah. It's not going to work. Now, if I go in here and it didn't show up. There we go. I'm just too fast. If I go in here and I actually click it, you can see the error message says this error occurred when the flow tried to create records. This required fields are missing and so on.
And this is a new flow error event that we now generate for screen flows.
Right.
There's an error.
Right, new flow error event. And so that particular item is associated with a chatter group, because when you do a notification, you have to associate it with some kind of record. So in this case, we just associated it with the chatter group. When you click on it, that's where it goes through, and we can see the messages here. Now, let's just jump over to Process Builder super quick and take a look at that. So you can see here we have, it's an in-act notification, flow error notification, here's the recipient and the user, and we can actually set the title and the notification body to have content in them. So we can say that flow error message is this. Now, this works great in Process Builder. It's actually pretty easy to configure. You can see that you choose your notification type and it shows you flow error notifications. The experience in Flow Builder is a little bit different.
So we're basically combining two features here, right? We have the flow error event and then use event payloads in custom notifications as well as in chatter now. We went through a bunch of the actions that you can take in Process Builder, and we added the event payload information of the ones that we could for this release. Those are the two additional ones. You can still do it, and I think it's get record, update and create records.
Yeah.
Which are the other really powerful ones.
So In Flow Builder, because when we add a new action, we have a slightly different experience. Oops, notification custom. Can't type and think at the same time. We don't have the ability just yet to create custom user interfaces for actions. It's actually something we're working on. This is a forward-looking statement. We're going to have them for actions and for screen components sometime in the next couple of releases. Hopefully you'll see us talking about them at Dreamforce. So unlike Process Builder, where we can actually go off behind the scenes, get the list of custom notification types and give them to you and let you pick one, here you kind of actually have to know what the ID is and set it yourself. So how do you get that ID? Well, what you can do is you can go into Get Records and you can choose custom notification type as your object. It's now an available object. And you can set it so that your developer name is equal to the API name of the notification that you want to check for. So in this case, it's flow error underscore notification. And then store that in a variable, which you actually don't have to do because Get Records is another place where we automatically assign the variables for you, and you can just get it right from there. I'll show you how to do that in just a second. Now, the second thing that people often find confusing is where they get this recipient ID. And in Process Builder, again, it gives you an option. It can take all different kinds of values, users and groups and accounts and a couple of other types of records. But what it expects is a collection. And so in this case, I actually wanted to set the user here, the recipient, to the current user ID. So I created a formula called current user ID, and it's basically just getting user.id, which is great. But I cannot actually just pass user.id formula field into the notification. I actually have to create a collection variable first. So I created a collection variable. It's just text because it's expecting a bunch of IDs. They don't even all have to be the same type. I could have a user and a group and a record. What I will do is I will go in there. I will set my variable values for recipient ID and just add the current user ID formula. And then once I do that, then I can pass that list into recipient IDs. The last thing that's a little unclear here is the target ID. This is actually the record that's associated with it. That's great if you have a record. If you don't have a record, you still need to provide a value for this. I usually just reuse the user ID. But the thing that you have to keep in mind is that in those notifications earlier, this notification is going to link to the record ID that you passed in. So if I run my flow right now, and my flow finished, which is great, and I go back to my notifications, and it's going to say, you've got mail, Flow is sending you a notification, yay, great. When I click in it, if I specify the user ID, it's going to take me to the user record. It's maybe not the thing that I had in mind, so that's why the earlier demo posts to a chatter group. Usually I think you'll have a record or something associated with this, so there are other things that you can do there.
I think the net is like, think of where you want to go.
Yeah.
But you do need to put something in that field.
Yeah. The help docs for this, I know it wasn't super clear in the release notes, but the help docs for this are now available. If you look up Flow Core Action Send Custom Notification in the help portal, you will find it. All right, so last pitch, learn more about Flow. We have build flows with Flow Builder and automate your business processes with Lightning Flow Trails. We have some getting started videos if you're not familiar with Flow that Alex Elston recorded back in spring. They're not up to date with the latest stuff, but they're still a really good getting started flow. And you want me to check out Flow Solutions on App Exchange. And one of the things that's really cool about that is we just did a whole Lightning Labs competition internally. We've got like 30 new templates coming up. And just like 2 days ago, as we were adding this very text to this very slide, someone was asking for sample flows so they could go in and sort of learn about the flow and modify it. And this is a great thing that you can do. You can just install the flow templates from App Exchange. When you create a new flow, you'll see all those templates, and you can just click the one you want to start from. And you'll get the whole flow right there, and you can just go and modify it and test it out and play with it as you wish.
Yeah, it's really exciting. These are really, really good places to start, right? Because you don't have that blank canvas anxiety.
Yeah.
And just to say, with these 30, like I was actually one of the ones that was curating the contest. They go from like really useful to just ridiculous. Like there is
ridiculous good or ridiculous bad.
Ridiculous, like I can't believe that's flow. And yeah, so good, very good. I mean, we have examples in there of it's essentially a full-blown flow app, right? I think one of them's a grocery store inventory control app where you can go and do inspections of grocery stores.
Process-driven apps are the way of the future.
Process-driven apps are the way of the future, and the Labs Flow templates are showing us the way.
Yeah. And as an aside, I now want to go through a whole bunch of commercials that say, I can't believe it's flow, as opposed to I can't believe it's not butter. Okay, dating myself a bit. Jen and gang, I think we are done on our side. Got any questions for us?
Yes, we do. All right,
I
so
bet.
Erin asked, and I think this was during Jason's part of the presentation, when you say employee record, do you mean user record, standard object?
So in this case, because in our fictitious demo example, we actually have employees who aren't necessarily Salesforce users, which of course you don't have any in your org, I'm sure. So we actually had a separate employee record. Eric started out as an applicant, which was also a custom object. And then as we converted him into an employee, we pulled all of the details off the applicant record and we saved them onto the new employee record when we ran the create.
Okay, Virginia asks, how many records can a schedule pull?
So let's see. You basically, I don't know if there's actually a limit. I'll have to check on that one. We can only run against what the limit I specified is. Yeah.
So it's definitely better to try and filter your criteria to be more specific
it's always
before
better
the flow
to filter,
enters, rather than to do a get records inside of the scheduled flow.
Correct, yeah. I mean, in general, yeah, I think the general guidance is try to use that query up front if you can, because then you're less likely to run into sort of running limits, like CPU or SQL, things like that, because it's just a very straightforward query to pull that stuff back. So we did that on purpose to help mitigate some of the issues people run into trying to get record and loop inside of their flows.
Yeah.
All right. Eric asks, will the flow list eventually be updated to support search and or Rolodex selection?
It's a good question. So I don't have an answer or an ETA for that right now. I believe the Rolodex is not a Lightning function.
Yeah, it's a Lightning list view, and the Lightning list views don't have the Rolodex, but they do have find, and they also have pinned.
Right. So those are the two areas we're looking into. The search one, unfortunately, it's a bit tricky because we created the list view so that way you could actually see both the custom as well as the standard flows. And then the standard flows are actually persisted and stored, well, I mean, they're created differently because they're coming from Salesforce Cloud than the custom ones. So when you want to search across both, that's sort of the high-level way of describing it, search isn't really designed that way. So we would literally have to change some designs to make it work. And so that's why I don't have an ETA on that one. I totally agree, it'd be super useful. In lieu of that, you can actually use some of the filter functionality to essentially do filters to kind of get the information that search would. But just the idea of this sort of like type it in, do the matches, the loose, the tight matches across two different types of data is very challenging.
Okay, next question is from Mr. Brian Kwong. Schedule flow. Yeah, right. For each record, what's considered a transaction for limit purposes? Is it one record, all the records in the schedule, something else? If I have 10 records in my max elements, 200, so in parens 200 times 10 for 2000, or is it 2000 since each record is treated as its own transaction?
Right, good question. So basically, essentially, the easiest way to break this down is kind of how flow just, we still incorporate how flow operates, right? So for a given flow, we've reduced the sort of like cycling that happens inside by not having to do a loop. So now we look at sort of the multi-flow scenario, right? So when you have a whole bunch of flows that are queued up and processed at the same time, then effectively our bulkification takes over. So essentially you will be, let's say for 200, for every 200 records, you will have a bulk operation for 200 records. Similar to how if you had 200 flows running, you'd have the bulk operation for that similar operation for the 200 flows. So essentially from a transactional perspective, that's the actual transaction that takes place. That is basically also what Apex does. So it's essentially, rather, we keep you away from the loop sort of limit, but transactionality speaking, it's the bulk 200 that it operates on.
Okay. All right. Mr. Kwong again, general comment. I love that the demo wasn't perfect. We all do those exact same issues for getting the exact API name. We're not alone. Virginia asks, by any chance, what you showed today would be part of the 30?
Oh, the templates you mean? That's a really good question. We don't have current plans. We were kind of discussing it. A lot of folks are like, we'd love to be able to just play with the demo and whatnot. We, in a way, kind of put ourselves in a tough spot because the integrations don't really work well if we were to try to template. They don't work if we try to templatize it. And so we don't have a good answer. We might be able to provide something, but we haven't figured that out yet. We literally just created the demo and started running it like, a couple weeks ago. So
yeah, I think one thing we can do, because I've been thinking through this, is we could at least do the part where we create the custom objects that are needed and we create the base flows. But we probably wouldn't be able to do all the stuff with the Slack actions and the Quip integration. But I think even that part might be useful for a lot of people. So I'm going to look at making that happen. And when I do, I'll probably post it on Twitter and on the unofficialsf.com site.
So that you mentioned the unofficialsf.com site. For those who don't know what that is, can you explain?
Yeah, so unofficialsf.com, actually, why don't I just, are we still presenting? I'm just going to into a window here and go unofficial, look at that. Oh, actually, let's just do flow resources.
Not like people.
Unofficialsf.com, it's a WordPress site. We have some posts. Some of them come from Alex and me, like the official folk. Some of them are from community members. And it's a great place to go and look for information on, look, here's the official Flow webinar and employee engagement, which is probably the same demo that we just gave. And I bet you Alex just posted this like while we were on the phone.
Actually, it looks like it, yeah.
Yeah.
I saw him looking at it
He
when
was
we walked
watching
over
it when
here.
we walked, yeah. And we also have some things like some installable screen components, which you can install in your own org. We need to go through and clean that up because some of them we no longer need since we have real, we have out-of-box components. We have some actions. Sometimes when people have asked about finishing behavior, like navigating directly to, for example, the employee record when the flow finishes, those all require custom Lightning components that are set up to be used as local actions in the flow. So we have some here that you can install. We are also, forward-looking statement, looking at creating some of those out of the box so you won't have to go and install them. But it's a great place to find lots of stuff that just isn't in the documentation because it doesn't necessarily fit the format of Salesforce help or docs.
Great. All right. If folks have any additional questions, I'm just going to give a minute or so for any additional questions to be submitted. Let me just go to the Trailblazer community to see if there's anything out there. But while we wait, a question for you on the UI piece and making lines, the connector straight. Is that on the roadmap at any point in time? That is a pet peeve of mine. You don't even know.
No, I know. Believe me, I know. It drives me crazy too. So there's a couple of things we're doing there, and one of them is, yeah, actually, I'm just going to say, yes, it's something we're looking at. No, it's not going to be spring because we're already most of the way through the spring release. We're still figuring out how exactly we're going to do it, but it's one of those things that triggers me as well, so be assured that it's something I'm looking at. We did, however, fix the issue where the new resource that you created wasn't showing up in the drop-down, so there's that.
Thank you for that. All right, Brian asks, does Jason Teller need a theme song too?
Are you asking me or Jason?
I guess either
I
one.
think Jason Teller absolutely needs a theme song.
Jason Teller thinks he wouldn't want to steal any thunder from Shannon Hale.
And Shannon Hale thinks she would be just fine with Jason stealing some of that thunder. So go for it, Brian.
All right, Sam asks, the schedule, I guess there was a question, and maybe you can show this, as to in the start node, how does someone know whether it's scheduled or not scheduled?
Sure. So this one's actually a screen flow. Let me just go back to the list. The way that you can tell right now is if you look at a regular flow that's like not a scheduled flow.
So the first thing is that there's that triggered column.
Yes, first thing is there is the trigger column right there. And if we actually go in and we look at the triggered column, you can see that the start node actually shows you the date and time that the schedule starts. Whereas if it wasn't set to schedule, do none, and we click done, it goes, all that extra information goes away. And the scheduled trigger that we have now is really just like the starting point for us to add additional concepts of triggering inside flows. So you're going to see different types of stuff coming up there over time as we move forward. But yeah, so you can see it in the list view and you can see it on the start node. And if you double click on the start node in a screen flow, nothing happens because screen flows don't really have any other trigger. They're pretty much a manual thing. You have to launch them. It would be really cool if they could show up on your watch at some specific time though.
That would be really cool.
And annoying probably, but cool. Any more questions?
Yes, one more just came in. Mark asks, if we have a question on the Lookup FSC installable component, where should we ask it?
Possibly on the unofficial SF site. There is a wiki that's been added. The Trailblazer community also has a number of people who are familiar with the Lookup FSC component. So that's another possibility.
And with that, I think we're all set for questions. I want to thank you again, Shannon and Jason, for coming on. Definitely come back with each release to share all the cool things that you're giving us with process automation.
Be happy to.
Definitely happy to. Thank you guys so much for your time. We love the opportunity to talk to you guys about this and help explain some of the features. It's very insightful for us as well.
Yep, definitely. We appreciate all your enthusiasm because we're really excited too. So it's like we don't want anyone to be frustrated. So that's like we go through and make sure that people know what they need to know.
Great, and as a reminder, we will be posting the recording as well as the deck out on automationhour.com and out on our YouTube channel as well, and our Trailblazer community, Salesforce Automation Hour. So with that, I'm going to end this call, and again, thank you so much for joining. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.